Hello, my name is Mike von Massow. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Food, Agricultural and Resource Economics at the University of Guelph and the curator of the FoodFocusGuelph.ca website and the FoodFocus Podcast. We've seen an unprecedented shock to our food system given the COVID-19 pandemic, which raises a bunch of questions relative to shortages of food on grocery store shelves and others. One we're hearing in the past few days is a question of whether our meat supply is at risk, given that we're hearing of cases of COVID-19 in some processing plants, and in fact some processing plants have shut down. I thought I'd take a couple of minutes just to talk a little bit about this and raise three critical points relative to this concern. First, I think it's important to know that we don't anticipate, even with some closures in the short term, that this will be have any significant effect on food availability in North American grocery stores. We have a well-integrated system in which product moves both ways across the border. So if individual plants close, we will often see both inventories that we have help buffer some of those closures, and the reallocation of supply from some of the other plants. We've heard concern relative to the Cargill beef plant just outside of Calgary, and it represents roughly 40% of the beef processing capacity in Canada. But we need to again keep in mind we see beef move both ways across the border and have an abundance of packing capacity in in North America, which will buffer individual closures, or more likely, as we're seeing in Cargill High River, a reduction in output given adjustments both with shifts and production in the plant to try and facilitate some physical distancing between staff, notwithstanding that it's hard. It's also important to note that most of these plant closures have been relatively short term. We heard about the Olymel plant in Quebec that closed given concerns about COVID-19. It appears now to be ready to reopen, and so the closures, when they've come, have been relatively short term. That's the first bit of good news relative to supply at the consumer side. The second point I wanted to make is that I think it's worth noting that these closures or capacity reductions will not be entirely pain-free. The pain, though, will be mostly borne at the producer end of the supply chain. In these production processes, we have relationships usually with one or more processor, and when that processor is shut down, we need to scramble to divert those supplies of animals to different processors, or hold animals longer until the plant reopens. Holding animals is a little bit easier in the beef industry, where we can slow production down a little bit, put them on maintenance rations and hold them, although we can still ship them to other plants as capacity is available. In the pork business, that's a little bit more difficult because many of these facilities are continuous flow and there are new animals coming up through the system, so holding them becomes difficult. We often end up scrambling to allocate them to somewhere else, or trying to come up with a way of managing those animals in the short term. That means that farmers are increasing cost if they're holding animals longer, or they're often seeing decreasing prices because there's excess supply in the system and they're having to ship those animals further. So while we don't necessarily need to be concerned about supply at the store or in the meat counter, we will probably see some pain borne by our producers, and we should be cognizant of that and probably look at ways that we can support farmers through those difficult times. The third point I wanted to make is that this conversation depends to a significant degree on the number of closures being both short and a relatively small number of the total processing capacity in North America. If that situation were to change, if, for example, more plants were to close and they were to close for longer periods of time, then we might start seeing some more significant disruption in the system where supplies may be compromised, although we do export a lot and, as I said before, have reasonably good inventories on hand. We might see prices go up, but we would see much more significant issues at the producer level. So we don't anticipate this happening. We've seen plants like the Olymel plant in Quebec close and reopen. We haven't seen that plant in Calgary close, although we have seen it reduce capacity. I think as we see the system work through some of these challenges, we hope that they will be both intermittent and not too significant in number, and that again we finish with the point we made at the start, that we don't anticipate having to deal with any sort of significant shortages at the meat counter in grocery stores across North America. Thanks for your time.